Now for, if you thought that was mean, now for perhaps the great rift. I talk now about this, and bye Patreon. Who knows? Pablo asks me. Now this is kind of a long text. I may edit. I remember reading this maxim that gamist, narrativist, simulationist was an either or thing, that games could only do one, and it never quite clicked with me why. It felt like a weird metaphysical property. This is referring to essays of mine from 25 years ago concerning what I now call playing on purpose. At the time then, I had encompassed them in the term creative agenda, which is actually a pretty good word for it, as long as you sort of circle each word and wonder what I mean by each one. Reasonable definitions, but open to misinterpretations. So let's see. He says, Pablo, you say, rereading, I think I get what you were talking about from the perspective of design effort. I'll stop here and say that Pablo and I have had an extensive conversation before the recording of this video. And that was, I hope you confirm this, Pablo, that was an excellent conversation. And this question, as far as his inquiry is concerned, is concluded. Now I'm summarizing some of those things, and I will be doing so in language and with perhaps some fervor that may make you think I'm picking on Pablo. No, he and I have had the conversation, and it was a nice one, and it went somewhere, which is great. But now, you collectively, the world out there, yeah, you're going to get it. So what Pablo says is that he he interpreted that as saying, well, I want to make a good game, and Ron is saying that you will dampen the goal of the game by including these other goals. And Pablo then says, well, why not think of it as designing a car? You want it to be fast and to be safe and to be efficient. These outcomes will often be at cross purposes, so you focus on the main one. And then he was thinking, well, wait, as technologies improve, you can ramp up all of them. And also there's such a thing as dropping a certain thing out to the extent that, that the whole thing's made, dysfunctional. So going back to games, Pablo says, that we may well find ourselves with systems that are overall better at satisfying all player aims at a basic level, and then maybe concentrate on like one. Okay, this is recapitulating what people were beginning to call, this abomination people were beginning to call the GNS triangle, sometime around that very same time that I was writing these essays, and attempting to point out that they were, basically barking mad. We're not talking about designing a car and then naming 3 good things that a car might have, speed, efficiency, and safety. This is not what we're talking about. We're talking about different human activities, things that people do in terms of social leisure, in this case, a creative activity. And then we are looking at basically what we get out of it and what we enjoy doing. Those are synonyms. So let me put it differently. What we are doing, which we came here to do as people. And that we don't really process these things. You do not have an encounter session, before a neighborhood pickup football match, about what winning and losing is going to mean for us here, right? This is not something we do. I don't think we need to do it. Now, what that means is that we aren't talking about qualities of a single thing that we're trying to achieve or have. We are talking about different things that people do in an unconsidered, intuitive, and personal way, that regardless is a collective activity and therefore requires the other people involved to be sharing, not overlapping, but sharing what we're here to do. And the notion that since role-playing is a medium, role-playing so-called, this activity that we're interested in is a medium, it can be turned toward different purposes of this kind. That's the insight that fascinated me in the mid-late 90s. And it was my interpretation of what was being discussed in a Usenet group called the RFGA. And I think their discussions actually went awry very quickly. And it took me a little bit in my own writing to realize that what I was saying was not where they had gone with it. That's when I said, okay, let's use different terms. I don't want to continue to use these people's terms because I would be misusing them. So then I started talking about story now and so forth. So the issue here is always, for me, to examine this in terms of a general human activity. I did not realize, and I will say this now, 20 years later, I said 25 years? Well, yeah, I started writing about it 25 years ago. The essays in question are from 20 years ago. 20 years ago, I was still unaware of the extent to which I think the activity itself had been broken and tortured into forms that, I would say dysfunctional back then, and everybody got upset. Are you saying I'm dysfunctional? You know what? You're fucking dysfunctional. And no, it ain't fun. I'm not talking about, I say your fun is bad and wrong. No, your fucking fun ain't there, because I'm looking at your messed up interactions. I'm looking at your, the meltdowns. I'm looking at the broken relationships. I'm looking at the boredom. I'm looking at the basically clowning around, and not in a supportive and fun way that makes things enjoyable and witty, or even just relaxed, but clowning around, meaning we have no idea what we're doing here, and all of the mechanisms of control that we're supposed to be countering, corralling, controlling, and delivering fun to others. I could go on about this, but I had not realized the extent to which this had pervaded what people called, the role-playing hobby, and certainly what they called the role-playing industry. I could tell you any number of explicit anecdotes as I moved into publishing, not just anecdotes, but the directives, the received wisdom that people sat me down and made sure that I should know, and so forth. The notion that, people buy these books to read them, play is irrelevant, that the important thing is to establish a product stream so that your distributor, trusts that there will be, another unit coming, that it had to be of this particular form factor because that's what the boxes are supposed to handle, that, all sorts of things. I mean, it just went on and on and on, the received wisdom. And so the actual economic and social infrastructure by which all this brokenness was occurring was absolutely evident to me. I mean, first glance, just one look and said, oh my God, people I met and respected for their work, basically being burned out husks, saying that they considered, that they'd given up. I'd say, oh, this stuff from, the early 80s, this is magnificent stuff. I'm like, oh, well, people don't understand it. People never got it, whatever. And I'd be like, wow, you're whatevering this game that you wrote that I consider to be, personally, transformative and has given me so much power and play, and that I look forward to playing again. And you're sitting there as this burned out husk telling me, with your head hanging, that, people can't read and people can't think and people can't play, and wow. So anyways, let's consider what I would think of as the baseline of operative play. First of all, we have something that I teach about now, which at the time, when I even started these classes 5 years ago, I didn't realize was a necessary subject of pedagogy. What would I mean by situational expression? That would mean that we understand there is a context for play, in which whatever scenes occur, events occur in them, or so forth, um, would be considered, fictional subsets. If we had gone somewhere else, it would be a different scene in that situation. Um, just as a side point, have you ever noticed that whenever I talk to people about players doing things and then that's like what sets the next scene and stuff like that, necessarily, I mean, that is a component of what the next scene will be, is where someone says they're going to go. And the response is always, oh, they can leave the adventure. They didn't have to stay in the adventure. They didn't have to go on the adventure. They're talking about the whole situation. To them, you either go through the whole thing step by step as they see it, or and planned it, or are in control of it, or you're leaving the adventure. The concept of staying in the adventure, that is to say, that particular situation. And yet, where you go and what happens in it is rather open. That's not only inconceivable, but once they conceive it, it becomes anathema. You just took away all their authorship, their control. I mean, authorship in the very, transitive, I am Joss Whedon, I am Robert Jordan sense. Anyway, so situational expression, the ability to express that there is this situation. That means you're talking to this, this dude in this scene, and there are aspects of that general situation that dude is taking as given, may mention or not mention, depending on their attitude toward it. Perhaps they've internalized it so much that they don't mention it, even though they act upon it. Or maybe they mention it because, why, what ho, traveler, you look a doughty sort, why there be a terrible troll in these woods, or some shit like that. Whatever. I don't care if it's explicit or not explicit. It is simply present and evident, either in retrospect when we realize why the dude acted funny, or right now, or in some way. So that's just referring to that particular non-player character's, demeanor and activities. We also have these player characters, and they have their things going on. This is like the Vesson business, right? My character walks in, and I have, in fact, formalized through character creation these things going on. And, pardon me if I think that because my dude's walking around in this fiction, that those things are now part of the situation too. So, situational expression. It's not just looking at the menu options that have popped up in front of you in this scene and going boink, right, and picking that menu option. This is much more about the general situation that is pervading everything we play. And how each person has their own particular angle of attack of how to express it in play, when and if they express it in play, and to what extent it will influence precisely what they choose to do or have happen, or whatever it is their authorities of the moment, require them or would ask them to contribute. So situational expression. Add to that two other things. Procedural orientation. The idea that you are, as a group, oriented toward how we play, how things are done. Organization of authorities, organization and ordering of speaking, when questions are asked, how they are answered, the constraints upon their use, what many people call the rules, rolling to hit, or anything of the sort. All those things that I like to talk about and give little names to, like IIEE and bounce and stuff like that. All of those things. How do those come about? How do we know? How do we come to points of uncertainty? That is a critical question that you need to know in order to be able to play. And those are rules, those are procedures, even if they don't seem to have, like a section, 4.2.b that, tells you that. So procedural orientation, and the understanding too that any procedural orientation requires a learning curve. Sometimes I think people are so stuck on the learning curve, they can't conceive of play at all, except in the sense of how do I get these people actually to use these rules at all? and they're stuck. To them, that's play. They're just stuck in that moment where they are the only one who has some notion of the rules, maybe an incomplete one or a tentative one of their own, and they're trying to get everybody else at least to be willing to, accord by them if at all possible. And they are so stuck in that learning curve, and maybe even a badly conceived one, which of course is counterproductive, that they cannot imagine playing where everybody just, gets that this game this way, these are the rules we're using, and it's not problematic. And if we make a mistake here and there, that's, oh, oops, okay, well, we'll either fix it right now, or we'll look back 2 scenes ago and go, oh, look, we fucked it up. All right, and keep going. And that the learning curve continues, of course, it gets richer. But there is a point after which the basics are there, and we no longer have to wonder about how we play. So that's 2 things: situational expression, procedural orientation. And then the third part of this, the interactive outcomes, that due to the intersections and contributions, and in many cases, questions and answers that comprise the usage of all the different authorities around the table, that's when we proceed through events and hit points of uncertainty. Some of them are coming from larger situational elements that we as actors, acting entities inside these scenes and procedures, could not have affected. I mean, it's a given. On Sunday, the black dragons, descending from the moon. Here it comes. Or things that are far more consequential from what we may have done at this point, right, due to either an over-aggressive attack or a die roll or something. This particular, village dude got his neck broken. Well, my character broke his neck. And, situationally, there is now, a mob gathering. And, I might want to go talk to those goblins that I thought were the enemy, because, frankly, they're better friends to me now than these villagers are. Stuff like that. Interactive outcomes. They would not have occurred without many people speaking and hearing one another, the critical part, honoring the things that are to be honored from what they said, embracing, as I say, the procedural aspects of how events occur and then how things turn out. That's 3 things: situational expression, procedural orientation, interactive outcomes. You know what I call those? I call those the basics. I call those fundamental. I call those the baseline. I call those the default. If anyone listening to this says, that sounds magnificent, that sounds amazing, that's the thing that we never achieve, it's the ideal, it's the golden, moments of play, that's the magic. It's not the fucking magic. That's the default. That's what you should be doing, like breathing, when you play those things. That was my orientation when I was writing those essays. I thought everybody did that. I thought everybody got that. I thought this was non-problematic. Little did I realize, never having really been involved in the subculture of the hobby, never having been to a convention before this time, never, bothered my head about, the new hot game coming out or anything. I did not realize that this was not, for many, many people, any sort of default or even conceivable. And that terms like story, terms like, we could go on, all sorts of terms like immersion, all sorts of things had turned into twisted, distorted, humpbacked, and contradictory versions of themselves in the attempt to square the circle that we're supposed to have this brilliant story, and we're supposed to receive this and experience it, and in awed and fascinated and edge of the seat entertainment, at the same time that we're actually supposed to be doing anything. And therefore there was no way to get into the next level of understanding anything, that we about what we do.